Chapter 1. Walker stood outside the door and heard it. He hated that apartment complex because the walls were so fucking thin. Anybody and everybody could hear what was going on behind them. Which made it clear the woman he was banging someone else. He dropped his fist, deciding there was no reason to knock, and instead turned, leaned back against the wall next to the door, cocked his leg and planted his boot on that wall. Then he crossed his arms over his chest and settled into wait. The Harley parked out front of Building C wasn't his, but that was his normal parking spot. Whoever was riding that bike was also riding the woman inside the apartment. He wondered how long he'd have to wait. Not too long, luckily. Sammy's familiar cries began to crescendo, a good indication she was about to come. Or about to fake it. She'd been known to do that, too. In fact, the second was more likely. Sammy was easy and convenient for when he needed to bust a nut, and it wasn't like they were exclusive or serious. They weren't. Or even that they cared about each other. They didn't. Hell, they barely liked each other. He'd come over. Occasionally, she'd feed his ass. They'd bang one out, and when he was in the shitter getting rid of the condom, she'd steal a 20 from his wallet. Sometimes more. Whatever. Having his wallet lightened by a 20 was still fucking cheaper than having a wife or a girlfriend. They could financially break a man. He'd witnessed it, and it was something he wanted to avoid. What he couldn't avoid was hearing Sammy's last high-pitched scream, which meant she was definitely faking it. Walker twisted his wrist enough to see his watch and time the inevitable. He watched each minute tick by. He'd give it 10, since that's how long it normally took him to bust and roll. 10. Low voices were heard, though he couldn't make out words. 9. The pipes in the walls squealed with the flush of the toilet. 8. More low voices. 1 female, 1 male. 7. A fake giggle. Typical Sammy. 6. Walker rolled his eyes when he heard nothing, which meant Sammy's guest was probably giving her a parting kiss and ready to split. 5. Footsteps heading his direction. Yep. 4. The pace getting quicker. Whoever it was wanted out of there. 3. More voices. The man throwing a last quick thanks over his shoulder, and Sammy inviting him to next time. Walker snorted and shook his head. 2. The deadbolt being thrown. The door flying open. 1. Game time. First time? The blond-haired man froze in the doorway, his eyes widening as he spotted Walker perched against the wall. The way the man was dressed, and because his bike was still stock, meant he wasn't a true biker, just a wannabe. Some weekend rider who wore a helmet and worked a 9 to 5. Got a bike to snag pussy. But he was a sucker and an easy mark for Sammy. Check your wallet, he advised the wannabe, jerking up his chin. As the man stared at him, his mouth opened and closed a couple of times, then he dug for his wallet in his, khakis. Fuck, wannabe grumbled as he peered into his empty wallet. Walker doubted it was empty before the man walked through Sammy's door. She lifted a 50. Walker's lips curled at the corners. Yep. Was she worth it? Wannabe's brow dropped low. No. Maybe 10. Then I'd go back in there and get your change. Wannabe glanced back over his shoulder. Really? Yeah, Walker said with a single nod. Or go back in and get your money's worth. Wannabe's eyebrows knitted together. Are you her pimp? Nope. Just passing through. Sammy appeared behind Wannabe in the open doorway. She finished tying the belt around her robe, then smoothed her hair down with her hand. She had sex hair, and unless the sex sucked, it normally wasn't tameable with just combing her fingers through it. No, he liked to leave a woman's hair in knots. Sammy was able to straighten her hair with a few passes of her fingers, so the sex must have sucked. Like he suspected, all that caterwauling had been fake. A way to get it over and done with quickly, so she could slide into his wallet and out before the bathroom door was even shut.
"What are you doing here, Walker? I wasn't expecting you."
"Apparently," he murmured, letting his gaze roam over her from top to toe. He pushed off the wall. "You owe him some change. Or a real orgasm."
"What are you talking about?"
Sammy didn't bother to hide her outrage as she pulled her robe belt tighter around her too narrow of a waist. Walker wondered why his attention ever landed on her. She wasn't even his type. But then, he wasn't looking to put a ring on it. She was good for taking off the edge when he was still amped up over a job. Like tonight. Ah, that's right. She had walked up to him at the local VFW, grabbed his dick, squeezed and whispered in his ear, "Want to fuck me?" He'd turned on his stool at the bar since his attention had been pulled from the Steelers game he'd been watching, took one look at her and with a shrug said, "Why the fuck not?" They went back to her apartment that night and fucked like rabbits. Then she became a habit. Now he was kicking that habit cold turkey. He stepped closer to Wannabe, slapped him hard on the chest, almost knocking the guy back a step, and murmured a "good luck" before giving Sammy a look over Wannabe's shoulder. "It's been real, honey." He turned on his boot heel and strode down the hall to Sammy, screaming, "Walker! Walker! This didn't mean anything!" No shit. He ignored her and at the end of the hall loped down the steps to the front door of the building, slammed the exit push bar, and headed out into the late summer night. Walker leaned his weight into one palm, which was planted against the shower wall. His head tipped forward, the water from the shower soaking his hair and sliding down his back and chest. He went through his Rolodex of women he used for jack-off material in his mind. Problem was, he always kept going back to one. An old memory, one he'd never forget. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. No matter how many women he'd been with for the past 19 years, none could knock her off the top of the list. Not one. His fist tightened around the root of his cock, squeezed, and he began to pump in earnest. Long, steady strokes from root to tip. The hot water continued to beat along his back, and he closed his eyes, his lips parting, inhaling the humid air from the shower, then releasing it. He could have gone to the bar and found another woman to relieve his load since he wasn't in the mood for leftovers with Sammy, but he didn't feel like making the effort of finding someone new. The fake smiles, the fake laughs, the fake name and stories, the questions, the made-up explanations. Finding a woman to fuck for the night took work. He was tired, so his own hand would have to do. He continued to stroke, closing his eyes, thinking back to soft thighs and soft sighs. A smile, a laugh, green eyes sparkling, auburn hair loose over the blanket he had spread out for them in the back of his truck. Beautiful. Nothing fake, all genuine. What a lucky man he'd been. His pace stuttered. He hadn't been a man. He'd still been a boy. Foolish. But fucking in love. Jesus, fuck. He needed to get out of the shower, find a porno with a little girl-on-girl action, and just bang it out. This reliving history shit was fucking up his groove. He shut the shower off with a curse and, balancing with one hand on the edge, leaned out of the stall to grab a towel. While he was wiping the water out of his eyes, he paused, tilted his head, and listened. His phone, vibrating on the bathroom counter. Fuck, he muttered under his breath, and wrapped the towel around his waist. He hopped out of the shower and made his way to the counter. The vibrating stopped. He shifted closer to the sink and snagged it. Unknown caller. It was almost 10 p.m. He saw he'd missed several calls, but no voicemails had been left. The phone started vibrating in his hand. Once again, an unknown caller. Something he normally didn't answer. But it was late, and he wouldn't put it past one of his fellow shadows to call him from a burner phone. He swiped the screen and barked, "Yeah," into the phone. Trace? That name brought a head jerk and a frown. He had no idea why someone would be looking for Trace. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Trace? A female voice. Quiet, but thick with worry. He had no fucking clue who it was. Got the wrong number. A pause. A shaky intake of breath. His spine stiffened and every muscle locked. I'm looking for Trace. No shit. There's nobody here by that name. Please, Trace, don't shut me out. He glanced up from where he'd been staring at the water dripping onto the floor. He caught his reflection in the mirror. Walker stared at the man staring back at him. He hadn't seen Trace in a long fucking time. He also had no idea why someone would be looking for him. There was no reason. None whatso-fucking-ever. How'd you get this number? Your sister? His blood ran cold when it hit him. Who it was. Why she was asking for Trace. 19 years instantly disappeared. The object of his masturbation fodder was talking into his ear. I'm sorry. You're probably not happy about me doing that, but I had no choice. We all have choices, Ellie. You made a choice years ago. You're right. I did. And I made another difficult choice by contacting your sister, begging her to give me your number. I made an even more difficult one by calling you. But I had no choice, she repeated more firmly. Whatever was in her voice was no longer trepidation, but determination and a touch of stubbornness. I'm assuming you're between a rock and a hard place right now and you need me to be the crowbar. But if it wasn't for whatever you're involved in, you wouldn't have ever reached out. With everything that happened, I assumed you didn't want me to. I didn't. Still don't. I should hang the fuck up. He should, but he wouldn't. He couldn't wait to find out why Ellie Cook was calling him. No, that wasn't right. It was Ellie McMaster, since she married one of the rich motherfucking McMasters, a man who could give her way more than Walker ever could. No, please, don't hang up, please. The determination was now gone, replaced with desperation. He set his jaw. Why the fuck are you calling me, Ellie? I hear you do. Jobs. Whatever the job is, Ellie, have your husband handle it. I don't have a husband. Walker stilled. You leave him too? In a way. He left me, she whispered. Hurt, did it? Bye, Ellie. He pulled the phone from his ear and swiped his finger across the screen, cutting off her plea.